A shattered clay pot holds more secrets than an entire library. This is the story of Roman pottery, the everyday magic that built an empire. You are about to unlock the full technical mastery behind these ancient objects, from the raw earth to the blazing kiln. How did a simple red cup become a coveted item across 3 continents? What hidden signatures did potters leave for us to find 2,000 years later? By the end, you will see a broken piece of pottery not as trash, but as a complex data chip from the ancient world. What does a civilization choose to make when it thinks no one is watching? The true story of a Roman pot begins not in the workshop, but in the ground. Before any wheel could spin, a potter needed the perfect earth. Across Italy, they sought out specific clay beds, geological treasures that were the foundation of their entire craft. One of the most legendary sources was near the city of Arezzo, a deposit of exceptionally fine, iron-rich clay that would become world famous. But simply digging it up was only the first step in a long, deliberate ritual of preparation. Freshly dug clay is stubborn and full of impurities, tiny stones and organic matter that would weaken a finished vessel. So the clay was left out in the open, exposed to sun, rain, and frost over an entire winter. This weathering process, called aging, broke down the material naturally, making it more workable. Next came levitation. The clay was mixed with large amounts of water in settling tanks, creating a thick slurry. As it sat, the heavier impurities like sand and gravel sank to the bottom, while the finest clay particles remained suspended. This creamy liquid was then drained into a second tank, leaving the grit behind. The water evaporated, leaving behind a purified cake of clay that was then dug out. Now came the physical transformation. The potter would knead this clay relentlessly, like a baker working dough, to drive out any lingering air bubbles and achieve a uniform plastic consistency. A single hidden air pocket could explode in the kiln's fierce heat, destroying weeks of work. This wasn't just one type of clay, either. The Romans were masters of material selection. For their exquisite, glossy red tableware, the terra sigillata, they used only the finest, most refined clays, like that from Arezzo. For a heavy storage jar meant to hold grain or oil, they chose a coarser, more abundant clay that was strong and inexpensive. The clay was their canvas, and its quality and character determined everything that followed. Choosing the wrong earth meant the difference between a masterpiece and a pile of shattered fragments. With this prepared canvas in hand, the potter could finally approach the wheel, ready to give form to the earth. This purified clay held a silent potential, waiting for the command to spin. The potter's wheel was the heart of the Roman workshop, a deceptively simple device that harnessed centrifugal force with elegant efficiency. It was a kick wheel, typically made of wood and stone, with a heavy lower flywheel connected by a vertical axle to a smaller, spinning work surface above. The potter would set the entire mechanism in motion with rhythmic kicks of the foot, freeing both hands to shape the rising clay. This constant, smooth rotation was the secret to everything that followed. The first and most critical step was centering. The potter would throw a lump of prepared clay onto the spinning wheel head, and with wet hands, apply steady, immense pressure. This was a moment of pure physical dialogue between human and material, forcing the chaotic mass into a perfect, vibrating symmetry at the wheel's core. A piece that was not perfectly centered was doomed, wobbling into a useless form as it grew. Once centered, the magic truly began. With a thumb pressed into the middle of the spinning clay, the potter opened the form, creating the vessel's interior space. Then, with fingers inside and out, they coaxed the walls upward, thinning and stretching the clay into graceful curves. The basic shapes were born from this dance. A gentle pull created a simple bowl or a drinking cup, a form repeated thousands of times across the empire. A more sustained, controlled lift could produce the elegant neck of a jug or the tall, tapered body of an amphora, the iconic Roman storage jar. The wheel's rotation imposed a natural standardization. Every bowl thrown from the same lump of clay, by the same skilled hands, would have nearly identical proportions and capacity. This was not just artistry, it was early industrial engineering. This consistency was the engine of Roman commerce, allowing for the reliable transport and trade of goods like wine, oil, and grain. A merchant in Gaul could order a shipment of amphorae from a workshop in Italy, confident they would all hold the same measure. We can still witness this ancient choreography today. Roman frescoes from Pompeii and elsewhere show us these craftsmen at work, bent over their wheels in concentration. Modern experimental archaeologists, using reconstructed kick wheels, have rediscovered the precise feel of the technique, the sound of the spinning stone, and the incredible skill required to maintain perfect rhythm. Watching a reenactor's hands guide a lump of earth into a symmetrical vessel is to see a 2,000-year-old mystery solved in real time. The spinning wheel left its own hidden signature, too fine. Parallel ridges called throwing lines on the interior of the pots, the permanent fingerprint of the potter's moving fingers. But a freshly thrown pot is incredibly fragile, a vessel of water and earth. Before it could serve any purpose, it had to undergo a transformation far more violent than the gentle spin of the wheel. It had to face the fire. Yet for all its speed and symmetry, the spinning wheel was not the only path a pot could take. Some of Rome's most iconic and massive ceramic objects were born from a much slower, more ancient dialogue between hands and clay. Before the wheel's whirl, there was the quiet, deliberate art of hand building, a set of techniques as old as pottery itself. One of the simplest and most intimate was pinching. A potter would take a single, solid ball of clay, press a thumb deep into its center, and then slowly, carefully, pinch the walls between thumb and fingers, rotating the lump to create a small, uneven cup or oil lamp. The result was a uniquely personal object, its walls thicker in some places and thinner in others, bearing the direct, unmistakable fingerprints of its maker. These were often everyday items for local use, not for grand trade, and their charming imperfections speak of a different kind of value. For vessels of truly monumental scale, the Romans turned to coiling. Imagine creating a storage jar taller than a person and wide enough to hold hundreds of gallons of wine or grain. This was the dolium, the giant fixed storage container of the Roman world. To build one, a potter would begin by rolling out long, thick ropes of clay. These coils would then be carefully stacked in a spiral, each new ring pressed and smoothed into the one below, gradually building the vessel upward from a broad base. The interior and exterior walls were meticulously scraped and blended to hide the seams, creating a seamless, massively strong container. This was a feat of engineering as much as art, requiring an intuitive understanding of structural integrity and drying time. A dolium under construction couldn't be moved. It was built in the very spot it would occupy for centuries, often partially buried in a cellar floor. The coiling technique allowed for this staggering size and custom fit, something a wheel-thrown pot could never achieve. Then there was slab construction, used for objects that defied the wheel's circular logic. Architectural ceramics, like the ornate antefixes that decorated temple roof lines, were made this way. A potter would roll out a flat sheet or slab of clay to an even thickness, like pastry dough. This slab could then be draped over a mold to create a curved, sculpted face of a god or a gorgon. Separate pieces, like decorative borders, were cut from other slabs and attached using slip, a liquid clay glue. This method gave artists the freedom to create complex, relief-style decorations that were both functional and powerfully symbolic, turning buildings themselves into statements of identity and belief. Each of these hand-building techniques required a different kind of patience and skill. They resulted in pieces that were not standardized, each one bearing the subtle, individual mark of the craftsperson. In a world increasingly filled with identical wheel-thrown wares, these hand-built objects remind us that Roman pottery was not a single, monolithic industry, but a rich tapestry of methods. Yet whether shaped by a spinning wheel or patient hands, every single piece of raw, formed clay shared one terrifying and transformative destiny. It had to survive a trial by fire, a volatile alchemy that would permanently lock its form and seal its fate. But the ultimate revolution in Roman pottery was not shaped by spinning wheels or patient hands. It was pressed into existence, allowing beauty and precision to be replicated thousands of times over. This was the world of mold-made pottery, and its crowning achievement was terra sigillata, the glossy red table, ware that graced elite Roman dining tables from Britain to Syria. The secret lay not in freehand skill, but in a master template. A highly skilled artist, a model maker, would first carve a detailed, negative design into a block of fired clay or plaster. This was the master mold, often featuring elaborate scenes of mythology, hunting, or intricate geometric patterns. Every groove and line in this mold was carved in reverse, a meticulous act of planning for the final product. To produce a bowl, a potter would take a flat slab of that exceptionally fine, refined clay and carefully press it into the carved mold. Using a damp cloth or their fingers, they would ensure the clay filled every microscopic crevice of the design. Then they would attach a separate coil of clay to form the foot of the bowl, and often smooth the interior on a fast spinning wheel. Once the clay had dried just enough to hold its shape, but was still slightly flexible, it could be carefully removed from the mold. What emerged was a perfect positive copy of the artist's original design, a bowl with sharp, identical relief decoration, ready for its signature glossy red slip and firing. This technique was a quantum leap in production. A single master mold could be used to create hundreds, even thousands of identical vessels. It democratized beauty, allowing households far from urban centers to own finely decorated tableware. More than that, it created a recognizable brand. The consistent style and quality of terra sigillata, whether made in Italy, Gaul, or North Africa, spoke of Roman taste and connectivity. Archaeologists can often trace the origin of a broken sherd simply by the style of its molded decoration. A hunting dog pattern might signal a workshop in southern Gaul, while a specific god's image points to North Africa. This was the ancient world's closest equivalent to a global product line, a shared visual language of dining and status pressed into clay. The mold captured more than just an image. It captured an idea of empire itself, standardized, replicable, and elegantly disseminated. Yet for all its perfection, this glossy red ware was still just shaped earth. Its final magnificent color and legendary durability depended on a volatile and unforgiving ritual, the last and most dangerous step in its creation. The true alchemy happened in the fire. The glossy red surface of a Roman bowl is not a paint, but a second skin of pure, transformed earth. This iconic finish, the hallmark of terra sigillata, was achieved through a meticulous process involving a liquid clay mixture called a slip, or ingobe. After a vessel was shaped, whether thrown on a wheel or pressed from a mold, It was allowed to dry to a leather-hard state. Then the potter would dip it into a vat of this special slip. This wasn't just any clay slurry. It was an engineered suspension of the same fine, purified clay as the pot's body, but with a crucial difference. It was exceptionally rich in particles of iron oxide. Sometimes the slip was brushed on for more control, especially on larger pieces. This coating had to be perfectly even, as any drips or thin spots would be glaringly obvious after firing. The iron-rich slip was the key ingredient, but the final vibrant red color was a secret unlocked only by fire. When the kiln was loaded, the atmosphere inside became everything. In an oxygen-rich or oxidizing firing, the iron particles in the slip would react chemically, turning a brilliant, permanent red. The slip did far more than just beautify. As it vitrified in the intense heat, melting just enough to fuse with the body of the pot, it created an impermeable, glass-like seal. This made the vessel non-porous, perfect for holding liquids without seepage, and gave it a smooth, easy-to-clean surface that resisted staining. It was a combination of practical genius and aesthetic brilliance. The desire for this perfect red gloss was so powerful that it fueled an entire transcontinental industry, with workshops competing to produce the most lustrous, deep-colored wares. A fine piece of terra sigillata was more than crockery. It was a status symbol, its flawless red surface catching the lamplight in a wealthy Roman's dining room, a silent testament to the sophisticated chemical understanding of the artisan who made it. But this beautiful, sealing skin was only the final flourish. The true metamorphosis, the violent and unpredictable act that gave pottery its permanent strength, was still to come in the roaring heart of the kiln. The kiln was the crucible where all the potter's skill faced its final, fiery judgment. This was not a simple oven, but a sophisticated, high-temperature furnace engineered for control. The most common design was the updraft kiln, a structure of brick and clay that functioned like a lung of fire. At its base was the firebox, a stoking chamber where the potter or an assistant would feed wood continuously for hours. Directly above this, separating the flames from the pottery, was a perforated floor made of special refractory bricks. This floor acted as a giant sieve, allowing the intense heat and gases to rise while catching any falling embers. Above this sat the main firing chamber, a domed space where the pots were carefully stacked. This dome was crucial. It captured and reflected heat downward, creating a swirling, even temperature throughout the chamber. Loading this space was a high-stakes puzzle. The pots could not touch each other or the kiln walls, or they would fuse together in a melted, useless mass during firing. To prevent this, potters used kiln furniture, simple tools made of the same clay as the pots. Triangular stilts supported plates and bowls, allowing heat to circulate underneath. Small clay spacers, like three-pronged stars, were placed between stacked bowls to keep their rims apart. Every piece was positioned with strategic purpose. Where that needed the highest temperatures and the most consistent heat, like the fine terra sigillata, was placed in the very center of the chamber. Here, the fire's rage was most even and controllable. Heavier, more utilitarian ware like storage jars or roof tiles, which could tolerate more temperature variation, might be placed nearer the walls or even closer to the firebox. The potter's understanding of his kiln's hot and cool zones was born from painful experience. A single misstacked shelf could lead to a chamber full of warped, under-fired pots, representing weeks of lost labor and income. Once the last clay spacer was set, and the chamber door was sealed with clay and rubble, there was no going back. The potter's work was done. Now, everything depended on the careful, relentless management of the fire itself. a days-long vigil that would test both patience and knowledge to their limits. The kiln door sealed, a master potter's work shifted from hands to eyes and instinct. This was the firing proper, a multi-day vigil where earth and fire performed their ancient alchemy. The process unfolded in distinct, carefully controlled stages, each with a specific goal. First came the water smoking phase, a long, slow warming over many hours. The initial fire was gentle, its primary purpose to drive every last molecule of water from the clay. This step was deceptively critical. Rushing it meant the remaining water would turn to steam inside the clay walls, building pressure until the pot literally exploded from within. Once the steam stopped rising from the kiln's chimney, signaled by a clear, heat-shimmered exhaust, the potter knew the pots were bone dry and could withstand greater heat. Then the real transformation began. The fire was stoked harder, pushing the temperature steadily upward into the oxidation stage. Here, with vents open and a plentiful supply of oxygen feeding the flames, any remaining organic material in the clay, tiny bits of leaf or root, burned away completely. The atmosphere inside the kiln was clear and oxidizing, and the clay body itself began its permanent chemical change, sintering as the particles started to fuse. For plain, utilitarian wares, this might be the final stage, but for the prized red gloss pottery, the true magic required a dramatic atmospheric shift. At the peak temperature, the potter would perform a crucial, counterintuitive maneuver: reduction. Just as the kiln reached its maximum heat, somewhere between 950 and 1050 degrees Celsius, the master would partially seal the vents and chimney, restricting the airflow. Oxygen became scarce inside the chamber. The hungry flames, desperate for fuel, began pulling oxygen atoms from anywhere they could find, including the iron oxide within the clay slip coating the pots. This chemical robbery, the reduction phase, altered the very nature of the iron. Deprived of some of its oxygen, the iron oxide in the slip transformed into a different compound, one that produced that signature, deep red color upon cooling. The timing was everything. Reduced too soon, and the results were muddy and uneven. Reduced too late or not enough, and the slip would turn a dull brown or orange. Achieving this without a modern pyrometer was an act of profound experience. Kiln operators used small peepholes, plugging them with clay, to judge the interior's color and the condition of the cones, small pieces of clay that slumped at known temperatures. They learned to read the roar of the fire and the color of the flame itself. A master could feel the kiln's pulse, maintaining this reduced, oxygen-starved environment for just the right amount of time before allowing air back in for a final, stabilizing oxidation phase as the kiln cooled for days. This final fiery breath was what turned a coated pot into a legendary piece of terra sigillata, its gloss sealed for eternity. The kiln's slow cool was a test of patience, the potter waiting to see if the gamble had paid off. But even a perfectly fired pot was not yet finished telling its story. Once unloaded from the ashes, it bore the subtle, unchangeable marks of its birthplace, a hidden code that would allow its journey to be traced across oceans and centuries. The brilliant red gloss of terra sigillata was a Roman masterpiece, but it was far from the only color in their ceramic palette. Across the empire, potters manipulated fire and chemistry to produce a stunning spectrum of finishes, proving their artistry was as much about controlled experimentation as it was about mass production. One of the most striking alternatives was black gloss ware, a style that predated the famous red and showcased a complete reversal of the firing process. To achieve this lustrous, jet black surface, potters used the same iron-rich slip as for red ware. The magic happened entirely in the kiln, Instead of finishing with an oxidizing atmosphere, the entire firing cycle took place in a heavily reduced, oxygen-starved environment from start to finish. In this smoky, choked furnace, the iron oxide could not turn red, instead transforming into a compound called magnetite, which produced a deep metallic black. The result was pottery of dramatic elegance, its dark surface shining like polished obsidian. This was not a mistake, but a deliberate and difficult technique, requiring absolute control to maintain reduction throughout the long, slow cooling phase. A single breath of oxygen too soon would ruin the effect, leaving streaks of brown or red. For potters seeking a canvas for color, a white slip provided the perfect foundation. By using a slip made from purified clay that was very low in iron, they could create a pale, almost white surface. This was not meant to be the final look, but a base coat, like primer on a wall. Onto this bright background, artists could paint vivid designs using mineral-based pigments. They used manganese to paint rich black lines and figures, and compounds of copper to create vibrant greens. These painted pots often depicted scenes from mythology or daily life, their colors popping against the pale ground, bringing stories to life on a drinking cup or a storage jar. Some of the most playful and tactile decorations involved barbotine, a technique that feels surprisingly modern. Here, the potter would take a thick slip of a contrasting color, often a creamy white or a different shade of red, and pipe it onto a leather-hard pot using a hollow tool, much like decorating a cake with icing. This created raised, three-dimensional patterns, swirling vines, rosettes, or geometric designs you could feel with your fingers. It was a celebration of texture and whimsy, turning a simple vessel into a sculptural object. This explosion of color and technique reveals a crucial truth. While the red tableware speaks to Roman efficiency and trade, these other finishes whisper of regional tastes, artistic daring, and a deep, playful curiosity about what clay and fire could truly do. The vibrant colors on a Roman pot were not just decoration. They were a story waiting to be read. Across the empire, particularly in the eastern provinces steeped in Hellenistic tradition, a different kind of pottery thrived alongside the mass-produced red gloss ware. This was the world of painted pottery, where artisans turned clay vessels into canvases for myth, nature, and abstract thought. The technique was a direct descendant of Greek vase painting, an art form the Romans admired and adapted. Using brushes made from animal hair or even frayed reeds, painters applied pigments derived from the earth itself. Manganese-rich minerals produced deep blacks and browns, while copper compounds could yield greens, and iron oxides offered a range of reds and yellows. The painting could be done at two different stages. Often, it was applied to leather-hard clay before firing. The moist surface absorbed the pigment, locking the design into the body of the pot during the kiln's transformative heat. In other methods, paint was applied after an initial firing to a surface that was already stable and porous, ready to drink in the color. This post-firing paint, however, was more fragile, often worn away by time, leaving us with only ghostly traces of the original artwork. The subjects they chose were windows into the Roman mind. Mythological scenes were immensely popular, depicting gods like Hercules in his labors or Dionysus with his reveling followers. These were not merely pretty pictures. They were statements of cultural identity, connecting the owner to a shared heritage of legend and divine favor. Floral patterns, acanthus leaves, vines, and stylized flowers brought a sense of cultivated nature and prosperity into the home. And geometric designs, from simple bands to intricate meanders, provided rhythm and structure, framing the central narratives with mathematical elegance. This painted tradition found its strongest foothold in the Eastern Roman Empire, in provinces like Egypt, Syria, and Asia Minor. Here, the influence of Greek artistic conventions remained powerful, and there was a thriving market for these narrative-driven, hand-painted pieces. They stood in deliberate contrast to the mold-made reliefs of the Western terra sigillata. Where Western ware offered sharp, standardized scenes pressed into the clay, Eastern painted pottery celebrated the unique, fluid hand of the individual painter. One was the product of industrial replication, the other of artistic interpretation. A painted vase from Antioch tells its story through flowing brushstrokes and layered colors, each line a direct record of the artist's moving hand on that specific day. It feels personal, almost conversational. This duality reveals the full breadth of Roman culture, a society that could perfect the assembly line while still cherishing the singular beauty of a hand-told tale on clay. But for every glossy red masterpiece on a noble's table, there were 100 humble, dark vessels that kept the empire fed. This is the world of coarse ware, the unsung workhorse of the Roman kitchen. These pots were not made to impress guests, but to withstand the daily assault of fire, water, and hard use. They were the olli, the simple cooking pots for boiling stews and grains, and the patini, the shallow casseroles used for baking and frying. Their clay was the opposite of the refined, purified material used for fine tableware. It was coarse, gritty, and often dug from the nearest convenient source, full of natural impurities. Yet this roughness was not a flaw, it was a deliberate engineering choice. Potters would actively add temper to this clay, mixing in materials like coarse sand, crushed pottery fragments, or in regions like Italy, gritty volcanic ash. This temper acted like a microscopic reinforcement system. When a cooking pot was placed directly over a flame, the clay walls expanded with the heat. The temper particles, having a different rate of expansion, created tiny spaces within the clay matrix. These spaces absorbed the stress, allowing the pot to flex slightly rather than shatter. It was a brilliant, low-tech solution to the problem of thermal shock, ensuring a pot could go from a roaring fire to a cool stone floor without cracking apart. The evidence of their hard service is baked right onto their surfaces. Archaeologists carefully study the soot patterns on recovered courseware. A pot blackened evenly all around its rounded body was likely suspended over an open fire or nestled in glowing embers. One with soot concentrated on one side only tells a story of being perched at the edge of a hearth. Its contents stirred and simmered for hours. These are not just dirty pots. They are diaries of daily life, recording countless meals prepared in their sturdy embrace. They held the simple, sustaining pulse of Roman existence, from a soldier's campfire to a farmer's hearth. Their soot-streaked surfaces, a testament to resilience over beauty. The same principles that shaped a drinking cup were scaled to build the empire's very skeleton. Roman potters turned their eyes upward, transforming humble clay into the skin and bones of architecture itself. This was architectural terracotta, where pottery left the table and climbed onto the roof, snaked beneath the streets, and clad the walls of temples and bathhouses. The most ubiquitous of these elements were roof tiles, a system of brilliant simplicity and standardization. The Romans used two interlocking types, the flat, slightly curved tegula and the rounded, cover tile imbrex. A tegular tile had raised edges on its two long sides, creating a channel. These were laid in rows across the roof's wooden framework. Then the curved imbrices were placed over the seams where the raised edges of two tegulae met, channeling rainwater smoothly downward and locking the entire assembly together against wind. This was more than just clever design. It was a logistical marvel. These tiles were produced in standard sizes, often based on the Roman foot. A contractor in Britannia could order a shipment from a workshop in Gaul. knowing every piece would fit perfectly with the ones made locally. This modular system allowed for rapid construction from military forts to sprawling villas, creating a unified architectural language across countless miles. But the scale of production was staggering. Creating a single tegula required a massive, shallow mold or a thick slab of coarse clay, often formed over a wooden frame. These were not objects a single potter could lift easily. They required teams of workers, large drying sheds, and kilns of monumental size capable of firing for days on end. The clay mix was crucial. Packed with gritty temper like crushed terracotta or volcanic sand to withstand centuries of freezing, thawing, and scorching sun without cracking. The same material science flowed underground. Terracotta water pipes, or fistulae, were essential for Roman sanitation and urban life. These were formed using the slab technique, with a flat sheet of clay wrapped around a wooden mandrel to create a cylinder, the seam sealed with slip. They were then fired to a stone-like hardness, creating durable conduits for aqueducts, bathhouse plumbing, and drainage systems. For grandeur, there was decorative revetment. Large, molded terracotta plaques, often painted in bright colors, could adorn the exteriors of important buildings. These depicted everything from mythological scenes to intricate geometric patterns, providing a durable and fire-resistant alternative to stone carving for communities without access to expensive marble. In every curved imbrex and every buried pipe, we see the potter's craft elevated to civil engineering, proving that the true strength of Rome was baked right into its very fabric. Roman oil lamps were tiny, portable suns, pushing back the darkness of an entire empire. Their production was a marvel of miniature engineering, perfected through the two-part mold technique. A master craftsman would first sculpt a detailed model of the lamp in wax or clay. This model was then pressed into a bed of fine clay to create a perfect negative impression for the top half, capturing every intended detail of the discus, the central panel. A second mold was made for the lamp's bottom half. These molds were fired to become durable, reusable tools. To cast a lamp, a worker would press slabs of clay into each half of the mold, trim the excess, and then join the two leather-hard pieces together with slip, sealing the future fuel chamber inside. The seam was smoothed, a filling hole was pierced in the discus, and a small wick hole was added at the spout. This method allowed for breathtaking complexity at a tiny scale, and more importantly, for mass production on a staggering level. The discus became a canvas for the Roman world. A simple lamp might bear only abstract volutes, or curling patterns, but many displayed intricate scenes pressed into the clay. You might find the god Bacchus with his grapes, a fierce gladiatorial combat, animals like lions or dolphins, or even intimate, erotic scenes. These were not merely decorative, they reflected the owner's tastes, beliefs, or humor, a private story cast in flickering shadow. Function dictated every form. The clay body itself was a careful recipe, tempered to withstand the constant thermal stress of a burning wick and hot oil without cracking. The lamp's shape was designed for efficiency. Its closed body minimizing spillage, the spout directing the light, and the filling hole allowing easy replenishment of cheap olive oil. To hold a Roman lamp is to hold a piece of controlled fire, a manufactured star that made conversation, work, and safety possible long after sunset. The humble oil lamp lit a single room, but another ceramic form powered the entire Roman economy across the open sea. Meet the amphora, the ancient world's standardized shipping container. These tall, two-handled jars were the indispensable workhorses of Mediterranean trade, carrying the liquid wealth of the empire. Their design was a masterclass in practical engineering, born from the realities of maritime transport. The most striking feature is the pointed base, a shape that seems awkward on land but brilliant at sea. In the curved, ribbed hull of a wooden cargo ship, these pointed ends could be tightly nested together, locking an entire cargo in place against the violent rocking of the waves. On land, the same point allowed the heavy jar to be tipped and securely embedded in the soft sand of a warehouse floor, or the dirt of a ship's hold, standing upright without a stand. Their bodies were thick-walled and robust, built from coarse, heavy clay to withstand the brutal stresses of a long voyage, stacked 3 or 4 high in the damp, dark belly of a ship. But the true secret of the amphora lies in its shape as a historical barcode. Archaeologists have catalogued dozens of distinct forms, each one a regional signature. A tall, slender amphora with small handles likely carried prized olive oil from southern Spain. A more bulbous, thick-necked type was the classic container for Italian wine. And the distinctive, cylindrical amphorae from North Africa and Portugal were famously used for garum, the pungent, beloved fish sauce. By simply identifying the shape and fabric of an amphora sherd found in London or Alexandria, scholars can map the precise trade routes of antiquity, tracing a jar of Spanish oil from its workshop to a British frontier fort. The final touch was the label. Before firing, many amphorae were dipped at the shoulder in a white slip, creating a painted surface. On this, scribes would quickly brush the tituli picti, the painted inscriptions in black or red ink. These were the ancient manifests, recording everything: the weight of the empty jar, the type and quality of the contents, the estate where it was produced, the name of the merchant shipper, and even the consular year. One broken jar shoulder might simply read, "Lucius's fish sauce, best quality." This was a system of accountability and commerce as sophisticated as any modern shipping label, baked onto clay for permanence. Each amphora was a single data point in a vast network. Its journey from a dusty workshop to a distant port city, written in its very form. The glossy surface of a fine Roman bowl hides a tiny, personal secret on its underside. Pressed into the clay before firing, often near the foot, is a small rectangular stamp. This is not a random mark, but the ancient equivalent of a brand logo and a manufacturer's signature. A practice central to the most famous pottery of all, terra sigillata. To create it, a potter or workshop owner would carve their name in reverse, along with sometimes a symbol or abbreviation, onto the end of a small wooden or bone rod. While the leather-hard pot was still on the wheel, they would firmly impress this stamp into the clay, leaving a clean, raised inscription for all time. This single act transformed anonymous mass production into a system of named accountability. The stamps most often appear in the genitive case in Latin, meaning of someone. So a stamp reading of Publius, or of the workshop of Gaves, is not just a name, it is a claim of ownership and origin. It declares this fine piece was made by, or under the authority of, this specific individual. For the Roman consumer, this stamp was a guarantee of quality. They came to recognize and trust certain names, much like we might look for a favorite brand today. A stamp from a renowned workshop in Arezzo, or later in southern Gaul, carried prestige, assuring the buyer of a superior gloss, a finer fabric, and more elegant decoration. For archaeologists, these stamps are pure historical gold. By cataloguing the names and tracing their distribution, we can map the rise and fall of workshops, follow the migration of skilled potters, and reconstruct ancient business networks. We see how a successful potter from Italy might set up a branch workshop in Gaul, taking his recognizable stamp with him. Sometimes we find the evolution of a stamp itself, as a master potter passes his business to his son, who then adds Philives or son of to the old family name. Beyond the workshop owner, we sometimes find even more intimate marks. Tiny, cursive graffiti scratched into the clay after firing, often on cheaper wares. These are thought to be the marks of the individual potter who threw the vessel, claiming personal credit for his work within the larger factory system. In a world of countless identical red bowls, the stamp is a startling moment of individuality. It pulls a single person from the blur of history. When you hold a sherd bearing the stamp of M. Crafts, you are not just holding a piece of Roman pottery. You are holding the product of meticulous crafts, a real man who lived 2,000 years ago, whose hands prepared the clay, whose workshop fired the kiln, and whose reputation was literally baked into every piece he sold. His success depended on the consistency of that red gloss, the sharpness of the molded design, and the durability that ensured his name would travel far and wide. In that tiny raised lettering, the impersonal machinery of empire becomes human again. Meticulous Crassus did not work alone. His stamp was the face of an entire economic ecosystem, one fueled by clay and fire. To understand Roman pottery is to witness the birth of an ancient industrial economy, with all its specialization, scale, and staggering reach. Workshops ranged from the intimate to the immense. In towns and on country villas, you would find the small, family-run officina, where a master potter, his kin, and a few slaves or apprentices produced wares for the local market. This was craft as a household enterprise. But then there were the industrial giants, places like La Graufisenque in southern Gaul, a site that redefines our idea of ancient production. Here, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a true factory complex, with rows of workshops, massive drying sheds, and batteries of enormous kilns, some large enough to fire tens of thousands of pieces at once. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Potters here worked not as individual artists, but as specialized cogs in a vast machine. One team would prepare and knead the clay. Another would operate the fast wheels, throwing nothing but bowls all day. Others applied the glossy slip, stacked the kilns, or managed the week-long firings. The output was monumental, flooding the Western Empire with its distinctive red tableware. To coordinate such an operation and protect their interests, many potters belonged to collegia, professional guilds. These were more than social clubs. They were powerful economic entities that set standards, controlled training through apprenticeships, negotiated with suppliers and shippers, and provided a form of social insurance for members and their families. A guild gave a potter a collective voice and a recognized place in the complex hierarchy of Roman society. But the true testament to this industry's power is found not in the workshops, but in the distribution. A bowl made in Gaul could end up gracing a table in Britain, North Africa, or even Rome itself. This was made possible by the empire's infrastructure, the famous Roman roads and secure sea lanes that turned the Mediterranean into a commercial highway. Merchants would buy in bulk, packing thousands of identical pots into the holds of ships or onto wagons, their value increasing with every mile they traveled from their source. The pottery itself became a de facto currency of culture, carrying Roman aesthetic tastes and dining habits to the farthest provinces. This is why archaeologists can use a broken piece of pottery as precise economic data. The sheer volume of Gallic terra, sigillata, found in a port city like Ostia, near Rome, tells a story of fierce market competition and shifting trade winds. When the style of pottery found at a remote fort in Germany changes from Italian to Gaulish ware, it's not just a change in dinner plates. It's a record of supply lines, political stability, and economic conquest written in clay. Each humble shard is a fragment of a ledger, a receipt for a transaction that crossed mountains and seas, connecting the hands that made it to the hands that used it in a silent, enduring network of trade. The stamp of a private workshop guaranteed quality for the civilian market, but another, more powerful institution demanded a different kind of standardization. The Roman army was a machine of conquest, and like any machine, it required a constant, reliable supply of parts. This included the very pots that cooked its food, held its water, and lit its barracks. The legions were not just consumers of pottery. They became some of its most disciplined and widespread producers. Wherever the army built a permanent fort or castrum, you would almost certainly find the telltale plumes of smoke from military kilns rising nearby. These were not artisanal workshops concerned with beauty. They were ceramic factories driven by the relentless logic of supply and demand. The needs were basic and massive. Every soldier in a legion of 5,000 men needed a mess kit, a casserole dish for baking, a lamp for his bunk, and a sturdy flask for water or wine. The army could not rely on the uncertain shipments from distant civilian potters. It had to produce these essentials on site, to its own exacting specifications. The output was a range of coarse, utilitarian ware known today as legionary pottery or military ware. These were thick-walled, robust vessels designed for a life on the move. Cooking pots, or olli, had rounded bases to sit steadily in campfire embers. Bowls were deep and simple. Lamps were plain and functional. The clay was often local, dug from the nearest suitable source, and the forms were repetitive, thrown quickly to fulfill a quota. But within this uniformity lies a fascinating historical signature. Just as civilian potters stamped their names, the military kilns often stamped their products with the ultimate brand, the legion itself. Impressed into the wet clay of a bowl or a brick, you might find a stamp reading Legii Roman 20 VV, for Legio Vicimi Valeria Victrix, the 20th valiant and victorious legion, or Legii Roman 2 AVG, for Legio Secunda Augusta. This was not about commercial credit. It was about accountability and identity within the vast military bureaucracy. It marked property. It told a quartermaster which unit's supplies were which, and it forged a tangible link between the object and the 5,000 men who shared its emblem. This practice allows archaeologists to perform a kind of forensic tracking of the army's movements across the map of empire. When a fort in Germany is abandoned and a new one is built along the Rhine frontier, the pottery stamped with a particular legion's mark appears at the new site, charting the unit's redeployment like breadcrumbs. Sometimes the story gets even more specific. A kiln site near a fort in Britain might produce pottery with the stamp of a legion originally raised in Spain, telling a story of that unit's long-term garrison duty far from home. The distribution of these coarse, stamped pots creates a ghostly outline of the legion itself, its presence imprinted on the landscape not just in stone walls and ditches, but in the very fragments of its daily life. To find a sherd bearing LGX stamped in clear letters is to hold a piece of a system, a fragment of the discipline that built roads, manned frontiers, and for centuries defined the Roman world. The discipline of the legionary kiln produced a uniform standard, but the empire was never a monolith of taste. Beyond the marching camps and major trade routes, in the provinces from Britain to North Africa, a fascinating alchemy was taking place. Local potters, now part of the Roman world, began to blend imported techniques with their own deep traditions, creating hybrid wares that speak of cultural conversation, not just conquest. This was not a story of simple imitation, but of creative adaptation, where Roman forms met local clays, colors, and centuries-old artistic souls. Consider the brilliant pottery of Roman North Africa, particularly the region of modern-day Tunisia. Here, potters mastered the Roman art of the slip and the kiln, but they painted with a different palette, while Italian workshops prized a consistent, deep red. North African artisans celebrated vibrant contrast. They would coat a pot in a creamy white slip, creating a bright canvas. Onto this, they painted designs in a rich, reddish-orange slip, using brushes to create flowing floral patterns, geometric motifs, and even charming depictions of animals and birds. The effect was lively and warm, reflecting a local aesthetic that favored bold, expressive color over the monolithic gloss of imported terra, sigillata. These pots were Roman in function and often in form, but distinctly North African in their joyful visual rhythm. Far to the north, in the damp chill of Britannia, a different kind of adaptation produced something rugged and essential. British black burnished ware is a pottery that feels born from its landscape. Made from local clays rich in organic material, it was fired in kilns with a heavy, smoky reduction that turned the vessels a deep, sooty black or grey. The finishing touch was not a glossy slip, but a physical burnishing. Before firing, the leather-hard surface was polished with a smooth stone or bone, compacting the clay particles to create a distinctive, slightly lustrous sheen. The forms were practical, echoing Roman shapes like cooking pots and bowls, but the material and finish were purely local, optimized for durability and heat retention over fine dining aesthetics. This ware did not try to mimic the imported red tableware. It answered the same daily needs with the materials and methods at hand, becoming the backbone of provincial kitchenware for centuries. Perhaps the most subtle and telling fusion occurred in Gaul, where sophisticated Roman pottery industries took root. Gallic potters became masters of the red gloss technique, eventually out-producing even Italy. But if you look closely at some of their mold-made bowls, alongside the standard Roman gods and goddesses, you might spot something older. Interwoven among the classical vines and figures are stylized patterns, spirals, and triskells designs that echo the ancient Celtic art of the Latin culture. This was not a rejection of Roman style, but a quiet integration of a visual language that held deep ancestral meaning. A potter in southern Gaul might use a Roman mold to ensure his bowl sold across the empire, but the design he carved into that master mold could include a hint of his own heritage, a local signature pressed into a global product. These provincial variations tell a profound truth about the Roman Empire. The spread of pottery techniques was not a one-way street of cultural imposition. It was a dialogue. Local communities adopted what was useful: the fast wheel, the efficient kiln, the popular vessel shapes, and then infused them with their own clays, their own color preferences, and their own artistic spirits. The result was a rich, regional tapestry of material culture. A meal in Roman Britain would be served from a dark, burnished pot that felt solid and local. A table in Roman Africa might be set with brightly painted flasks that sang with Mediterranean light. Each was authentically Roman in its own way, proving that the empire's greatest strength was sometimes its capacity to be adapted, to absorb local flavors, and in doing so become something more than just Rome. This dialogue between past and present is not just theoretical. It is being recreated today with fire, clay, and hands willing to learn through trial and error. This is the world of experimental archaeology, a field where scholars become potters, and ancient workshops are reborn to answer questions no text can. To truly understand Roman skill, you must try to replicate it from the ground up. Teams of archaeologists and modern ceramicists begin by sourcing clay from the very locations the Romans used, like the legendary beds near Arezzo. They then follow the laborious process of levigation, settling, and kneading, discovering firsthand how the removal of each tiny impurity transforms the material's workability. They build replica kilns based on excavated foundations, using period-appropriate bricks and tools, and then face the immense challenge of loading them correctly. One famous experiment at a site in Britain attempted to fire a full load of replica pots in a reconstructed Roman kiln. The team learned that stacking was a high-stakes puzzle. Pots placed too close to the kiln walls emerged warped and underfired, while those in the perfect central zone achieved a beautiful, even hardness. The most dramatic revelations come from the firing itself. Without thermometers, how did a Roman potter know the exact moment to shift from an oxidizing to a reducing atmosphere to create that perfect red gloss? Modern experiments show it was a sensory art. Potters monitor the color of the flames, shifting from orange to a clear, rippling heat, and watch test pieces, called cones, placed in viewports that slump at specific temperatures. They learn to feel the kiln's roar and read the smoke. In one meticulous recreation, the team maintained a reduction atmosphere for several hours, starving the kiln of oxygen. When the sealed door was finally broken open days later, the replica bowls inside had indeed transformed into a deep, consistent red, proving the precise chemical control these ancient masters commanded. These experiments reveal that much of a Roman potter's expertise was tacit knowledge, never written in a manual. It was stored in the muscles of hands that knew exactly how much pressure to apply when centering a massive lump of clay on a kicking wheel. It lived in the eyes that could judge the leather-hard consistency perfect for attaching a handle. It resided in the instinctual timing that knew when to close a flue, a decision that meant the difference between a warehouse of marketable red ware and a heap of wasted brown failures. This was knowledge passed from master to apprentice over years, through watching, doing, and sometimes through costly mistakes. Every successful modern firing is a conversation across 20 centuries, a humble acknowledgement of the profound, unwritten science that lived in the hands of Rome's artisans. That unspoken knowledge locked in ancient clay is now a language we are learning to speak fluently. In a modern archaeology lab, a broken sherd is not trash. It is a complex data capsule, and scientists have developed remarkable tools to crack its code. The first step is often the most fundamental: typology. This is the careful classification of pottery by its shape, style, and decoration. By comparing a newly discovered pot to an established sequence of known forms, archaeologists can often pinpoint its date with surprising accuracy. Think of it like identifying a car. You can look at the headlights, the body shape, the tail fins, and match it to a specific model year. Roman pottery evolved in predictable ways, the curve of an amphora's neck or the profile of a bowl's rim changing subtly over decades. A typologist, with a trained eye and vast reference collections, can often look at a single rim fragment and say, "This is from the early 1st century," or "This is from the late 2nd century." This provides a crucial chronological anchor for an entire excavation layer. But typology only tells part of the story. To discover where the clay was born, scientists turn the sherd into a translucent sliver of stone. In a process called petrography, a technician cuts a thin slice from the pottery, grinds it down until it is thinner than a sheet of paper, and mounts it on a glass slide. Under a powerful polarizing microscope, this thin section comes alive as a miniature geological landscape. The individual grains of sand, the fragments of crushed rock or volcanic ash used as temper, glow in distinct colors. An expert petrographer can identify these minerals like fingerprints. Does the sample contain distinctive red garnet, sand only found along a certain river in Gaul? Does it have the unique volcanic glass shards from the hills near Naples? This microscopic signature can often trace the pottery back to its specific regional clay source, sometimes even to a single valley. For an even more precise elemental fingerprint, there is chemical analysis. Techniques like XRF or X-ray fluorescence allow a scientist to point a handheld scanner at a sherd and within seconds get a readout of its precise chemical composition. The exact percentages of iron, calcium, potassium, and other trace elements. Every clay bed has a unique chemical recipe based on the local geology. By creating a database of these signatures from known kiln sites, archaeologists can match an anonymous pot found in London to the exact workshop in Gaul that produced it. This is how we map ancient trade routes with scientific certainty. A cluster of British black, burnished ware in a military fort on the Rhine frontier, confirmed by petrography, tells us about supply lines. A pile of North African cooking pots in Rome, confirmed by chemical analysis, reveals the massive grain and oil shipments that fed the capital. Each technique, from the art of typology to the hard science of chemistry, peels back another layer of the story. That simple shard holds locked within it the secrets of its maker's hands, the chemistry of its homeland, and the long journey it took across the empire. It is a piece of a puzzle, and when fitted together with thousands of others, it begins to show us not just objects, but the pulsing network of an entire civilization. The data locked in a sherd is only the beginning of its modern story. After excavation, a broken Roman pot enters a second, more delicate phase of its journey, moving from the archaeologist's trench to the conservator's lab. Here, the goal is not analysis, but preservation, a painstaking art that bridges centuries in silence. The first step is often a gentle cleaning. Centuries of burial encrust a pot with hardened soil, mineral deposits, and sometimes the corrosive salts from groundwater. Conservators use tools as fine as dental picks and soft brushes, along with carefully controlled ultrasonic baths or mild chemical solutions, to dissolve this matrix without harming the original surface. It is a process of millimeters and minutes, revealing the true color of the clay and the faintest traces of paint or slip that were invisible in the field. Then comes the great puzzle. A single excavation might yield hundreds of fragments from dozens of different vessels, all mixed together. Conservators sort through this ceramic confetti, looking for matches. They examine the curve of a break, the thickness of the wall, the color and texture of the fabric. It is a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle where most of the pieces are missing, and the box lid, the original complete pot, has been lost for 2,000 years. When matches are found, the fragments are carefully bonded using modern, reversible adhesives. Gaps are often left unfilled, a testament to the missing history. This leads to the central ethical question of restoration. How much do we rebuild? The philosophy in most museums today is one of minimal intervention. The aim is to stabilize the object, to prevent further deterioration, and to present what survives with honesty. A conservator might reassemble the major pieces of a large amphora, so we can understand its monumental scale and shape, but they will not repaint the missing sections or sculpt new pieces from plaster to make it look whole. The empty spaces are part of the object's truth, a visual record of its fragility and the passage of time. This respectful approach allows us to see the artifact as a historical document, not a replica. Yet there are exceptions, particularly for objects of extraordinary artistic or educational value. A stunningly complete restoration might be undertaken for a unique, painted vase where the surviving fragments tell a clear story. In these cases, missing areas might be filled with a neutral-toned plaster, carefully textured to match the clay, but deliberately left a different color, so the modern work is distinguishable at a glance. This allows the viewer's eye to complete the form, to appreciate the potter's original intention for the vessel's shape and balance, while still understanding what is ancient and what is new. Walking through the Roman galleries of the British Museum or the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you are witnessing this quiet diplomacy between past and present. A glossy red sigillata bowl, once in 100 pieces, now sits whole on its pedestal, its surface intact enough to show the perfect sheen of its slip and the crisp detail of its molded design. A towering African amphora, its cracks neatly aligned, conveys the sheer physicality of ancient trade. This work does more than display objects, it resurrects conversations. It lets us see the elegant curve a potter's hand once followed, and understand the volume a Roman merchant once filled with wine. Conservation is the final, patient act of listening to what these broken things have to say, ensuring their stories are not lost to the air, but preserved for the next 1,000 years of wonder. But beneath the gleaming surfaces of museum cases lies a shadowy counterpart to this honest preservation. The very qualities that make Roman pottery so valuable to history, its beauty, its rarity, and the stories it tells, have also made it a prime target for deception. For every genuine artifact patiently restored, there exists the possibility of a clever fake, a forgery crafted not 2,000 years ago, but perhaps just 20. This is the dark, fascinating side of collecting, where ancient skill meets modern fraud. The incentive is simple economics. An intact, beautifully decorated piece of terra sigillata, especially one bearing a clear stamp from a famous workshop, can command a staggering price on the private antiquities market. A complete oil lamp with a rare mythological scene or a perfectly preserved figurine can be worth thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars. Where such money flows, forgers are never far behind. They study the same typology guides and archaeological reports as legitimate scholars, learning the exact shapes and styles that collectors most desire. Using modern clays and electric kilns, they can produce objects that, to an untrained eye, look convincingly old and beautifully crafted. So how do experts separate the ancient truth from the modern lie? The first clues are often visual, but deeply technical. A forger might perfectly replicate the shape of a first-century bowl, but get the profile of the foot ring subtly wrong, using a design that archaeologists know only emerged a century later. This is an anachronism, a chronological mismatch that screams forgery. The glossy red slip might be a shade too orange, or applied with a uniformity only a modern spray gun can achieve, lacking the slight variations of a true Roman dipping process. The stamp is often the forger's greatest challenge and most telling mistake. Carving a stamp in reverse is a specialized skill. A forger might copy a known stamp from a book, but without understanding the nuances of Latin epigraphy. The letter forms might be too crisp and regular, lacking the slight wobble of a hand-carved tool. Worse, they might combine elements from different genuine stamps to create a new fictional potter's name, or use a known name with an incorrect abbreviation. An expert epigrapher can spot these inconsistencies instantly, reading the stamp not just for its text, but for the style and confidence of its carving. The most definitive proof, however, lies within the fabric of the pot itself. Scientific analysis becomes the ultimate detective. Petrographic thin section analysis might reveal mineral temper that is geologically impossible for the claimed origin. Chemical analysis could detect trace elements of modern pollutants, like zinc or lead from industrial contamination, that have no business being in ancient Roman clay. Sometimes the very perfection of the object gives it away. A pot that has spent 2 millennia in the ground should show microscopic signs of wear, subtle etching from acidic soils, or minute, random abrasions. A forgery artificially aged by being tumbled in a drum with sand and gravel often shows damage that is too uniform, too theatrical. Each attempted forgery, once exposed, teaches us more about the real thing. It forces experts to look closer, to define the authentic with even greater precision. This cat and mouse game adds a layer of modern intrigue to the ancient craft, a reminder that the past is not just something we dig up, but something we must also protect from our own desires to possess it. The same clay that held a soldier's rations could also cradle a soul's journey into darkness. For the Romans, pottery was not merely a tool for the living. It was an essential bridge to the gods and the departed. In the solemn space of a tomb, archaeologists find carefully chosen ceramic companions for the deceased. Small, delicate bottles called unguentaria are common. These slender vessels, often with a long neck and a bulbous body, once held precious oils, perfumes, or even tears, offerings of scent and memory meant to comfort or anoint the dead in their passage. Alongside them, you will almost always find a lamp. This was no accident. Placed within the tomb, its wick perhaps burned once and then extinguished. The lamp served a profound symbolic purpose, to light the dark, unknown path to the afterlife. Its small terracotta body became a vessel for hope, a tiny, enduring spark against the void. The pottery chosen for graves was often personal, but rarely the finest tableware. It was frequently simpler, sometimes even purposefully broken or killed, a ritual act releasing its spirit to accompany the deceased. This tells us the Romans saw these objects as possessing a functional essence beyond the grave. The lamp could still emit light. The bottle could still hold sacred liquid in the realm of the shades. This belief in pottery's enduring utility shaped their entire approach to death. Above ground, pottery facilitated conversation with the divine in everyday life. In the corner of a Roman home stood the lararium, the household shrine. This sacred niche held figurines of the family's protective spirits, the lares. And before these figures, families would place simple ceramic vessels, small cups and plates. These were used for daily offerings, a few grains of wheat, a splash of wine, a bit of salted cake. The pottery here was humble, but its role was monumental. It was the physical interface for piety, the dish that held the gift, that maintained the covenant between the home and the gods. The choice was deliberate. Ceramic was pure, earth-born, and could be easily cleansed. On a grander scale, ritual pottery governed public sacrifice. Specialized vessels were used in temple ceremonies, from large craters for mixing wine and water to shallow pottery used for libations. The act of pouring an offering onto the altar. The form of these vessels was standardized by religious tradition. Their use a sacred choreography. Even the remnants tell a story. Archaeologists find particular types of coarse ware jugs and cups in vast quantities at temple sites, often in pits alongside animal bones, the discarded tools of 1,000 fulfilled vows. Whether in the quiet of a tomb or the smoke of a public altar, the pottery selected was never arbitrary. A glossy red sigillata bowl was for showing off to your guests. A simple black cup was for offering to your ancestors. The material, the form, and even its condition were all part of a silent language spoken to the invisible world. In these sacred contexts, clay became more than a container. It was a conductor for belief, a tangible expression of hope, fear, and reverence that has survived, intact, long after the prayers themselves have faded into silence. The silent prayers of Roman tombs were not the last words spoken in clay. The fall of the Western Empire shattered political unity, but the ghost of its ceramic genius never fully vanished. It lingered in the earth of abandoned kilns, in fragments reused in medieval walls, and most importantly, in the enduring human desire for beauty and utility. The long shadow of Roman pottery stretched across 1,000 years, waiting to be rediscovered. This legacy re-emerged not as a single revival, but as a series of echoes, each culture hearing the old techniques and answering with its own voice. In the early medieval period, across Europe, pottery became local, crude, and hand-built once more, a technology in retreat. Yet even in this so-called Dark Age, the memory of Roman wheel-thrown forms and kiln technology never completely died out. In places like Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, the tradition continued unbroken, preserving the knowledge of slips and controlled firings. This knowledge became a seed, carried by trade and conflict. A crucial transmission line ran through the Islamic world. As it expanded, Islamic potters encountered the sophisticated ceramic traditions of the former Roman provinces, from Syria to North Africa. They absorbed and then transformed these techniques with breathtaking innovation. Building on the Roman use of slip, they perfected tin glazing. By adding tin oxide to a lead-based glaze, they created an opaque, brilliant white surface, a perfect canvas for the intricate cobalt blue painting that would define Islamic pottery. This was not mere imitation, it was a quantum leap. Yet the foundational step, the concept of coating an earthenware body with a decorative, sealing layer, was a Roman principle pushed to a new artistic extreme. These stunning wares, traded across the Mediterranean, eventually washed back onto the shores of Italy. There, during the Italian Renaissance, a fever for classical antiquity took hold. Wealthy patrons and scholars, obsessed with rediscovering the art of Rome and Greece, saw in these imported Islamic pots a reflection of ancient glory. Italian potters in centers like Deruta and Faenza began to produce their own versions, creating what we now call majolica. They used the Islamic tin glaze technique, but painted it with scenes from Roman mythology, portraits of contemporary nobles, and elaborate grotesques inspired by frescoes in the newly excavated ruins of Nero's Golden House. A Renaissance majolica plate, with its luminous white ground and a painted scene of Hercules, is a perfect cultural hybrid, a direct technological heir to Islamic science, applied to a Romanesque visual ideal, all fired onto a medieval Italian form. The lineage is unmistakable, a chain of knowledge passed from Roman slip to Islamic tin glaze to Renaissance artistry. But the Roman legacy was not just about aesthetics, it was about systems. The true, profound debt our modern world owes to Roman potters is one of industrial logic. The Roman approach, with its standardized vessel sizes, division of labor, factory-scale production, and quality control via stamps, established a blueprint for mass manufacture. When the Industrial Revolution dawned in the 18th century, pioneers like Josiah Wedgwood did not look at medieval potters as their model. They looked at principles the Romans had mastered. Wedgwood's famed Etruria works were a direct descendant of the great Gallic factories like La Graufisenque, scaled up with steam power. He sought consistency, repeatability, and brand identity, goals every Roman workshop master would have understood. He even used a stamp, Wedgwood, as his guarantee, just as a potter in Arezzo used, of M. Crafts. Today, from the porcelain insulator in a high-voltage power line to the uniform brick in a skyscraper, from the mass-produced ceramic tile in a subway station to the precisely engineered catalytic converter in a car, we live in a world built on ceramic industrialization. The fundamental idea that clay could be engineered, shaped at scale, and fired to a predictable standard for a global market, that idea was baked into history 2,000 years ago. The red gloss may have faded, but the imprint of the system remains, permanent as a stamp fired into the underside of time. From the clay pit to the blazing kiln, The journey of a Roman pot reveals a civilization's soul. We have traced the earth from its purification, to the whirl of the wheel and the patience of the mold, through the volatile alchemy of the kiln, and across the vast networks of trade. These were not just objects, they were conversations in clay and fire, between artist and material, between workshop and world, between the living and the divine. They fed armies, lit homes, carried wine across stormy seas, and held offerings to the gods. In their glossy red surfaces, their painted myths, their coarse, soot-blackened walls, and their stamped signatures, we find the complete story of Rome, its artistic brilliance, its relentless economic engine, and its quiet, daily humanity. This technical mastery was so profound, its logic so enduring, that it never truly vanished. It slept in the ground and in the memory of craft, only to reawaken centuries later, shaping the world we live in now. Every time you use a mass-produced cup or walk on a ceramic tile, you are touching the end of a chain that began when a Roman potter first centered a lump of earth on a spinning stone. So the next time you see a simple piece of pottery, in a museum case or even in your own kitchen, look closer. See the echo of an empire in its curve. Imagine the hands that formed it, the fire that forged it, and the long journey it has made through time to reach you. What fragment of that world would you most want to hold? Would it be a bowl from a legionary's kit, a lamp that lit a scholar's midnight work, or a perfectly glossy cup that last touched lips 2,000 years ago? Tell us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries of ancient craft, be sure to subscribe for more. There are always more secrets waiting in the dust.